So let's keep looking at the do-while loop a little bit more, and let's walk through the example that we see here actually in the text. So this is on page 56, so that you can follow along. I will admit to you that this is a really can I call it a contrived example? This is not necessarily, number one, good design. Number two, this is not good example design. There's just a lot of questions to be asked here, like why, for example, if I'm looking at a Celsius conversion, which we see here, for example, 5.1, why is it that I'm doing it 15 times? It's really weird. Over the course of a day, we want to do something 15 times. Look, if you fall asleep, that gives you 1 hour to wake up and then take 15 temperature readings before you have to go back asleep again for the next day. It's just really strange design. But nevertheless, it's the example we have, so it's what we're going to work with. So if we look at the design for the question here, essentially what the question is saying is that every day a weather station receives 15 temperatures expressed as degrees in Fahrenheit. So what we are going to do is create a program that will accept each one of those Fahrenheit temperatures. Next, it's going to convert it into Celsius. And finally, it's going to display that converted temperature. So after 15 temperatures have all been processed, the result is going to be a display that says all temperatures processed. So that's what our program does in its entirety. Not altogether that complicated. So we're supposed to take 15 Fahrenheit temperatures. We're going to convert those to Celsius. We're going to display those. And when we're all done, we're going to let the user know that everything is all processed. So that is everything that we need this particular program to do. So if we look down here, I do believe this is on page 56. If we look down here at what the actual solution is, that would be here under B, the entirety of the solution algorithm. And I just want to kind of walk through a little bit of what's happening here so that we can see how the do-while structure actually works. First and foremost, we need what is known as a priming read. This is on line number 1. A priming read sets our counter for us. So unlike the counted repetition, the do loop, we need a mechanism to be able to, number 1, enter into, and number 2, exit from our do-while statement. So that is our priming read. So the priming read is pretty typically the line immediately above your do-while statement, and it gives you some means to enter into that statement. So you'll notice we have here on line number 2 is temperature count, and here on line number 1 we're setting temperature count to 0. So that's kind of the relationship we have between those two elements. We would have the priming read be related to what we have going on in our loop continuation statement. So there is what we've got going on with just those first 2 lines. Next, we enter into our do-while loop. And again, notice that do-while and end-do are on the same vertical line. So we are entering into our do-while loop. And now we have a statement that lets us enter and exit into there. And that is temperature count is less than 15. So if you think about it, we start at 0, and that means that this will continue until temperature count is 14, and that'll still evaluate as true. But at 15, this statement will evaluate as false because 15 is in fact not less than 15. They're equal. So that's the number at which this statement will finally exit out on. So inside of our do while statement, we have the following statement block. We are going to ask the user for Fahrenheit temperature. Remember, we would want to include in actual quotation marks here uh, a good statement that leads the user to a good interaction with our program, but that's something we will add back later on through our supplementary examples. Next, we're going to get that temperature, because remember, those are the first two pieces here from what our program is supposed to do. It is going to receive temperatures, and then for each of those temperatures, convert them to Celsius. So down here, next, after we get our Fahrenheit temperature, we would go to this line here where we're doing the actual mathematical conversion for Fahrenheit to Celsius. Now, do take notice, line number 5. Are we simply telling the next developer in the chain, hey, do the Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion? No, because that leaves a lot of ambiguity. That leaves a lot of room for the next developer in the chain to make a mistake. So rather than do that, here on line number 5, we're actually going to provide for them the computation they need to make Celsius temperatures out of Fahrenheit. Next, we're going to display that temperature in Celsius. And finally, this is important here on line number 7, we have to add 1 to temperature count. The other way we could have expressed this is T_C for temperature count plus plus. This is, I admit to you, that looks kind of like half of a hashtag, but it is in fact plus plus. That idea of plus plus is increment in every compile time language, so that works just fine too. And you can shorten up what happens here in this line with add 1 to temperature count would be temperature count plus plus. And that's it. That is all of our statement block. At the end of line number 7, the following conditions occur. So we get to the end of line number 7 right here, and this statement goes back up to the top of the do-while loop, and we are going to evaluate the statement again. So the first time we came through, temperature count was set to 0. And as we went through our code block here, TC equals 1, right? Because we added 1 to temperature count. So now we have to take all of this into account when we come through and look at what happens at the top, so line number 2 of this particular statement again. So this time, temperature count is going to be 1. Is 1 still less than 15? Yes. So it's going to continue and do all of this statement block again. Now, the interesting thing is going to be what happens on the 15th iteration here. On iteration number 15, what's going to happen is, instead of 0, like we see here on the screen, so let me just get rid of this for you, on the 15th iteration, so that'll be number 14, right? Because we started at 0 and we're working our way up. So we want our iterations to go from 0 to 14, right? Because this is really 15 increments. On the 14th time, here on line number 7, that's going to be 14 plus 1, and that's going to equal 15. So that's the 16th time we come through here, right? So now temperature count equals 15. And we come back up here to evaluate again on line number 2. This time, is temperature count less than 15? And the answer here is going to be no, right? Because 15 is in fact not less than 15. 15 is equal to 15. So finally, line number 2 evaluates as false. So what happens after that? We actually skip this entire code block and we are released from this particular loop. The next line here, line number 8 in the flow of control. So when we go top to bottom, left to right, we have to intercept that flow, and we intercept that by using loops, essentially. So now what happens is we can finally display the all temperatures processed here and get out of this particular loop that's happening there. So some things to note here, and we will look at another example as we come through with code in Sublime Text, is the idea of the loop control mechanisms. So we need a couple of things in order to control this particular loop. First and foremost, we need a condition to get in. That is our priming read. That is here on line number 1. That is going to give us a condition that we can test against, and that is going to give us a condition that we can use to get out of our particular loop. So that's first thing to take a notice of. Second is here on line number 2. This statement, temperature count less than 15, gives us something to control against. So we need the number 3 to increment on that. If we skip line number 7, so if for whatever reason we just decide, yeah, no number 7, we're not going to add 1 to temperature count, we are going to create an infinite loop. Because without the incrementing of temperature count right here, we never ever create a condition where temperature count is going to be greater than or equal to 15. And that creates the idea of the infinite loop, a loop that we can enter into, but we can never escape. So those are the things to notice here. Again, are as follows. So let's just get rid of some of this stuff that's happening here. So the things to take notice of, we have here our priming read on line number 1. On line number 2, we have our keywords do while, and that is going to be connected here to line number essentially 7, and that's going to be our end do. We have a loop continuation statement here. We are going to continue on in this loop as long as temperature count is less than 15. We have whatever happens inside of our code block here, but the thing to take notice of is happening here on line number 7, where we have add 1 to temperature count. If we don't add 1 to our counter, we are never going to get out of our loop and will maintain an infinite loop, which we don't want. And finally, we have whatever happens post our process. We have to display for the user that all temperatures processed. So that is what happens here inside of a do while loop. And we'll look at another example using Sublime Text in just a moment.